Please join us as Pastor Steve Brower continues our study in the book of Numbers. Our passage will be Numbers chapter 31. In this passage, we see God providing a victory for Israel that constituted their greatest victory before they entered the land, even as it set to right their greatest failure. We see the amazing character of God on display in a way that would have caused the nation of Israel to marvel.
Numbers 31 is the passage that we will be studying this morning. I entitled this A Model Victory. It really is a picture of perfection when it comes to victory, and it is a call that is there for all of us from that standpoint to consider what God is laying out for the Israelites. He's also laying out for us as well, Numbers chapter 31. Perhaps you've heard the statement, the world has yet to see what God can do with a man fully consecrated to Him. Have you heard that before? You've probably heard that. It's often attributed to D.L. Moody. In fact, though, Moody did not originate the man, but this guy did. Maybe you recognize Moody, maybe you don't. The guy on the right, look at the screen. The guy on the right is Moody, a younger Moody. The guy on the left is a man by the name of Henry Varlow. He was a British revivalist who had befriended Moody in Dublin. And Moody, in 1873, D.L. Moody asked Henry to recount words they had spoken in a private conversation a year earlier, right before D.L. Moody had returned to the United States. And Varley provided this account. This is recorded in a book called Crucial Experiences in the Life of D.L. Moody. And he writes that during the afternoon of the day of the conference, Mr. Moody asked me to join him in the vestry of the Baptist church. We were alone, and he recalled the night's meeting at Willow Park and our converse the following morning. "Do you remember your words?" Moody asked. And Henry replied, "I well remember our interview, but I don't recall any special utterance." "Don't you remember saying, 'Moody, the world has yet to see what God will do with a man fully consecrated to Him'?" And Varley replied, "I don't actually remember saying that actual sentence." "Ah," said Mr. Moody, "those were the words sent to my soul through you from the living God. As I crossed the wide Atlantic, the boards of the deck of the vessel were engraved with them. And when I reached Chicago, the very paving stones seemed marked with, 'Moody, the world has yet to see what God will do with a man fully consecrated to Him.' Under the power of those words, I have come back to England, and I felt that I must not let more time pass until I let you know how God used your words to my innermost soul." And as you know, D.L. Moody did his best to live out that maxim, and God blessed him in the doing. But really, thousands of years before that conversation, the fledgling nation of Israel was confronted with that same concept on a national scale. That is actually the purpose of this passage, Numbers chapter 31. If we put ourselves into that area, that mindset, the context of what's happening, the second generation of the Israelites are about to enter into the land. They've already experienced, though, the greatest moral failure of their time. The first generation, the moral failure, was probably at Kadesh Barnea. Maybe it was before that at the foot of Mount Sinai when Moses came down with the Ten Commandments the first time, right? Maybe it was there. But maybe it was at Kadesh Barnea. Either way, they had their moral failures. For the second generation, the greatest moral failure of their time was what? Do you remember? What did they fail at? This was Numbers 25. We went over it. You'll remember this, as I pointed out. This was when Balaam had talked to the kings of Moab, and they sent the women of Moab into Israel, and they seduced them, and they had the great plague that fell on Israel. That was the second generation. And that was their great moral failure. And so now they were at their Kadesh Barnea moment. They're about to enter into the land. And would they succeed or would they fail? And so what happens in this text, Numbers 31, is we are presented with a historical account. It's kind of written in a stylized manner, if I could say it that way. It's an idealistic thing. And I don't mean to say it's not historical. I do believe it's historical. I believe it's accurate. But it's presented in such a way to kind of elevate it and to say, this is what it looks like to obey God. And I think it's a tremendous message for us to see and hear and understand and embrace. There is a note of triumph and idealism that lifts up this battle into kind of ethereal realms, because you have the camp of Israel that is presented as the host of Yahweh going forth and experiencing victory and blessing and wholehearted commitment to God. In some ways, we saw Israel at their worst, the second generation, when the women of Moab had come in unto them. And now we see Israel at its best. So what picture should we have, you and I, of total obedience to the Father? What picture should we imagine when we think of a life sold out to God? You know, there are a lot of anemic pictures of total obedience all around us. In fact, if you and I look at our own lives, we would probably say, there, within my heart, within my life, is a picture of anemic obedience. I obey God, but there's times when I don't. And if that's true for me, I'm guessing it is also true for you, simply because we are human. And so what would it look like to have a life of total obedience to God? What would that look like? This is what the nation of Israel is presented here in this passage. It gives us a picture of this wholehearted commitment to God. And so these are the things that it's going to lay out. And in fact, I moved the safety one into the abundance one, and I forgot to update the PowerPoint. So we're going to look at 3 provisions of God that show this. God provides victory, fellowship, and abundance. And that safety will be a part of abundance. I am going to warn you now, the first point is the longest, so despair not. Once you get through the first point, the other 2 will go more quickly. So if you're looking at the time, you're like, let me do the math, we're in trouble. Don't despair. God provides victory. What happens when a person, a nation, is wholeheartedly committed to God? God provides victory. Part of that victory is the realization, the recognition, the adaptation of God's enemies to be our enemies. Look in your Bibles, Numbers chapter 31, verse number 1 through 3, or you can see it on the screen. Numbers 31, 1 through 3. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. God is speaking to Moses. He is telling him, do this before you die. Verse 3. So Moses spoke to the people, saying, arm men from among you for war, that they may go out against Midian to execute the Lord's justice on Midian. Avenge. Now, when we hear the word avenge, we often think of vengeance. We think of vengeance, which is appropriate. Take vengeance. And we might associate that word or that concept with almost the idea of revenge. Petty, excessive revenge. The idea of revenge has a very negative connotation to us. But we need to understand that this word can also describe God's righteous judgment against evil. And it's used in this way here. The Midianites had treated the Israelites as enemies. They purposely led them into a fatal situation. It was an attack upon them. It might not have been an attack with a sword, but that was only because they had found out that would not go well. And so instead, they attacked them in a different way. And you remember what happened, don't you? This was when Balaam, that magician from the ancient Near East, was hired to pronounce a curse upon Israel. And as he went to pronounce the curse, he could do nothing but give them a blessing, which was enormously frustrating to those who were paying him good, hard gold to make that happen, right? And yet, on his way back, he told them, hey, you should attack Israel in this way. And what was the way? It was underhanded. It was by bringing in these women to pull them away from God. And so we see it in Numbers chapter 25. It says, the name of the slain man of Israel who was killed with the Midianite woman was Zimri, the son of Salu, chief of the father's house belonging to the Simeonites. And the name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cozbi, the daughter of Zur, who was the tribal head of a father's house in Midian. If you remember the story, you have one of the men of Israel, after God had said that they should have nothing to do with them, that he actually took this woman and they walked right in front of all of Israel in order to commit immorality before the Lord. And Phinehas slew both of them. It was a brutal situation, but it demonstrated the seriousness with which God took all of this. And as we remember this story, we remember, A, God took this very seriously. B, these were people from Midian, and God was upset with them. So verse number 16, the next verse is, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, harass the Midianites and strike them down, for they have harassed you with their wiles, with which they beguiled you in the matter of Peor, in the matter of Cozbi, the daughter of the chief of Midian, their sister, who was killed on the day of the plague on account of Peor. And so Midian had set itself as an enemy of God, and God desired to use Israel as a weapon against them. This might offend our sensibilities. We'll say more about that. But God had made it clear. He desired for Moses to set this account aright before he died. And so Israel's battle with Midian functions to restore or repair the Peor incident, their worshiping of Baal. It was an amends from that standpoint. And so God is saying, here's how you can make things right. And this is an embracing of God's enemies. And so when we think about this concept of God actually calling them to that same concept, God's enemies must be our enemies. But we also see that victory is found in the presence of God. Look at verse number 5 and 6. It says, so they were provided out of the thousands of Israel, 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to war, 1,000 from each tribe, together with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, with the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarm in his hand. There is a fighting force that ultimately is brought forward. And that fighting force is interesting. You'll notice several things there. They were provided out of the thousands of Israel, 1,000 from each tribe. So 12,000, which is a solid fighting force. But along with them, in verse number 6, you also see Phinehas going out. And Phinehas brings with him vessels of the sanctuary and trumpets for alarm. So what is that all about? Probably included in those vessels from the sanctuary, probably included is the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant is the dwelling place, the throne, as it were, the place that God resided, if you could say it that way, in a physical manner. And so by Phinehas taking the articles of the sanctuary, he is actually bringing the presence of God. And remember, this was not a talisman. It wasn't take this special thing and through that special thing, you're going to then have victory. This is about God going forth in power. This is about God actually joining with Israel in their battle. When we talk about God being there with the Ark of the Covenant, it's about God's presence moving forward. This is the Shekinah glory, going forward to do battle against the enemies of God. And the whole point of the trumpets of alarm is to draw attention to God. This is Numbers chapter 10. It says, when you go to war in your land against the adversary who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God, and you shall be saved from your enemies. So their battle is not merely for the sake of God's honor, but it's a retribution delivered by God against Midian. God is intensely involved in this. This is all about God doing war with his enemies. And we ought to learn from this. Because we could ask the question, do you want victory in your life? Victory over sin, victory over temptation. Then you must do so with God, not apart from God. It isn't about attempting to do battle on your own because God calls you to do that. God does not say that you should go forward in your own strength. What God says is that we should walk with Him. And I would take that, dear friend, as literally as possible. You want victory over sin? You want victory over those things in your life that plague you? Then you must walk with God. He must dwell with you. This isn't about saying, I need to memorize a verse and I use that as a talisman, as if I'm taking the Ark of the Covenant with me. It's saying, I want to walk with God. And if I am walking with God, then sin will have nothing to do with me. Then I will have nothing to do with sin. The only reason I have something to do with sin is because I have separated from God. If I want to have victory over that, I must walk with Him. Can you imagine God being defeated in battle? It's not going to happen. And so they walked with God into battle. If He was with them, they would win. That's the idea. And this is the idealized victory that we are presented here. God is making clear to the second generation of Israelites, they're about to ready to enter into the promised land. They're going to fight battle after battle after battle. And the one thing that's crucial is that God is with them. That He is the one who is leading them into battle. And it is no different for you and I. Because we might think that we can do things on our own, that we'll turn to God when we need Him. Well, newsflash, we always need Him. We must walk with Him because we cannot live life without Him. And so we ought to learn from this as well. God's enemies must be your enemies, must be our enemies. Victory is found in the presence of God, and war, we recognize, is not for the weak of heart. Look at Numbers chapter 31, verse 14 through 17. And Moses was angry with the officers of the army. So what happens? They go out, they do battle, they come back, and Moses is mad. You say, well, I'm seeing a tendency in Moses. But in this case, it does not appear that he was angry unjustly or in a sinful manner. Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds who had come from the service in the war. Notice who he's angry with. He's angry with the officers, those in charge, not with the actual Israelites. Moses said to them, have you let all the women live? Now, man, if that doesn't offend your sensibilities, it's like, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how I should feel about that in 21st century America. How should I feel about that? God says, Moses says, why did you let all the women live? He goes on, behold, these, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And so the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. And so Moses instructs them to kill all of those people that God would say had seduced his people and pulled them away from him. Now we look at this and we go, man, that is really, really tough. You know, Moses is enraged because they took captive the women of Midian when the women of Midian were the ones who had caused them to die. Now, I just want us to wear this. I want us to put it on. I want us to feel the weight of this. Because it's really easy to say, well, is it really that big a deal? And I think there is so many things for us to relate to in that statement, okay? And I want to paint this picture as clear as I can. Because it's so easy for us to take things that seem like a really big deal to God, and we ask that question, is it really that big of a deal? And that's exactly what's happening here. Because God said, this is a massive deal. These women led my people astray. And to me, this is a huge deal, so much so that they forfeit their lives. And we might look at that and go like, is that a big enough deal to cause them to die? And I would say, then you do not hate sin enough. Can I say it that bluntly? Then you do not love God's people enough, according to God. Because God said, these people caused my children to die, and because of that, their lives are forfeit. And we look at that and go like, man, I don't know if I feel quite as strongly as God about that. And that's exactly the point that we have to wear. Because it's like if God felt that strongly about it, if he felt like that was the case, would we really challenge him on that? Would we really say, God, I don't know that you were just in doing that? He required their lives because they were guilty of attacking Israel first. And how many died because of their attack? 24,000 died because of their deceitful and subversive actions. And now, here come the children of Israel with these same women in tow, and it would be appropriate to say, have they deceived you again? Are you still choosing them over God? Are you still deciding that they are more valuable than God himself? Do you see how that could have been the case? And God and Moses is ultimately saying, this will not stand. And he declares that they should all die. Now we should also note that this is not the normal approach to warfare with nations outside the promised land. Deuteronomy 20 verse 14 states without qualification that women and children should be allowed to live. So in normal warfare, according to Scripture, this was not the way to act. In this case, however, you have this added factor of Midian attempting to destroy Israel. This is a punishment that fits the crime. And so the Lord himself determined that Midian be destroyed. Who gets to make that call? Only God. Only God. This was not a standard operating procedure for the army of Israel. The army of Israel's standard operating procedure was to spare the women and children. But this is a case where God says, because they were the ones who actually did this, then they must die. We should also recognize that in ancient warfare, victory was often followed by taking spoils and captives, by destroying defeated cities. The spoils would include flocks and herds and anything else that was of value that could be transported. The captives would include entire populations at times, or in cases where men had been killed in battle, the women and children who remained became the captives. The children would help strengthen the viability of existing families who had lost people in battle, and would help. The women would obviously help in the creation of new families. And in a world without strong social programs, the family was that social security net. Survival meant having a strong family so that your children could care for you as you age, just as you cared for your parents as they aged. And so the importance of belonging to a strong family also meant that when men in an area had been killed in battle, the taking of women and children captive was to benefit those families who had lost those men. A law in the book of Deuteronomy even names the sorrow that could accompany a woman leaving her old family to become part of a new one. Remarkably, it makes sure she was given time to grieve. That's Deuteronomy 21, when she was taken from one family to another through war. As one commentator notes on this law, he writes, "We might like to live in a world without wars, and thus without prisoners of war. However, the Old Testament law recognizes such realities and seeks to mitigate their worst effects by protecting the victims as far as possible." Now again, we might look at this in 21st century America and say, why didn't God just say no wars? And I would say he does, and he has a plan for that, but it involves Jesus and the eradication of sin on earth. And that is a long process. And in the midst of that, he said, here's what this should look like for the Old Testament in war. And in the New Testament, he says, here's what this should look like for the body of Christ, for the church at large. And so we might get uncomfortable looking back at the Old Testament and saying, well, isn't God saying that this is okay to kill these women and even these male children? How is that okay? And I would say it is okay because who gave them life? God did. God did. And he is the one who has the authority to take that life. You say, I don't know if I like that. And I would say that that ultimately is the picture we are given of God. Now, how should we apply this? God's enemies must be our enemies, and we should give no quarter to those enemies. You know, dear friends, we become so accustomed to sin in our life that sometimes we fail to treat it as evil as it is. Does that resonate with you? We must learn to hate sin like God does. God hates sin with a perfect hatred. He loves righteousness with a perfect love. And we mix the two. And it is so easy to do. You know why God doesn't tell any white lies? Because they are evil. And he hates every one of them. And if in your mind you think, yeah, but some lies are kind of necessary, and I would say, dear friend, you do not hate evil the way God does then. Because he would say, they're wrong. God does not act with selfish sinfulness ever. 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 Because sinful selfishness is evil. God does not put the interests of others before his own occasionally. God does it always. I mean, listen to our Savior talk about our enemy. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 through 30 says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. You say, man, that's radical. Did Jesus really mean that? And I would say he is speaking in hyperbole, no doubt, but he is emphasizing how much we should hate evil. We should hate it. How much we should hate sin. But here's the truth of it. Here's the personal testimony that I share with you. I'm not proud of this. I'm ashamed of it. But it is the truth. That there is sin in my own life that I grow so accustomed to that it does not seem as evil as it should be. And I have to remind myself again and again that God hates that sin and that I should hate it more. And he loves the righteousness, even the ones that I don't always do, right? Even the ones that I don't surrender to his Spirit so that his Spirit works through me in. And he calls us to that. And it's like, okay, what does that look like? What if somebody really lived that way? And I would say, if you lived that way, he would provide you that victory. That's exactly what we see here in Numbers 31. What happens when a nation or a person is wholeheartedly committed to God? God provides victory. Secondly, God provides fellowship. God provides fellowship. Look at verse number 19 and 20. It says, encamp outside the camp 7 days. Remember, this is a historical account presented in a stylized way. So he is intending to point out this is a model victory. And in the midst of the model victory, what happens? Encamp outside the camp 7 days. They come back and they are, after battle, they are unholy. They are unclean. And they need to be purified. And so all of the soldiers need to stay outside the camp 7 days. Whoever of you has killed any person, whoever has touched any slain, purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. You shall purify every garment, every article of skin, all work of goat's hair, and every article of wood. Now we look at all of that, and it's so foreign to us, we don't think much about it, but what is the point? What is the purpose of this purification process? We have to remember what Numbers is all about. God is providing a way for an unholy people to be in his holy presence. And as an impure people, they have a way to be made pure so that they can dwell in the presence of God. And that's the purpose. That is the joy. That is what he is seeking to do for them. He is providing a way for that. It's truly incredible. Now again, for us, we are so blessed that it's easy to take this for granted. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1. For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. So just think about what it's saying. Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, it's talking about the Old Testament system, and it says, look, they needed to draw near to God, and so they had ways to do it, but it could not make them perfect. It couldn't get them to the point where they were perfect. They had to continually offer those sacrifices. Well, what are we given? Verse 11 through 14, same chapter, Hebrews 10. And every priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. In other words, they have to continually do it. But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Man, isn't that glorious? Amen. He sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time until his enemies shall be made a footstool for his feet. Jesus has already accomplished it. It's already done. And then it says, the last verse there, verse 14, for by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. Man, what a glorious passage. Just think about that. That single offering. We are perfected for all times. We are already made perfect. But then he says, those who are being sanctified. So we are put in a position of perfection. We're justified. We are made perfect, but we are being sanctified. Man, that's glorious. Because I know, you know, that I am not perfect, at least not entirely holy. That sanctification process, that process of being made more and more and more and more holy, is an ongoing thing. But yet in God's eyes, perfected for all time. What a glorious thing. And what's the point of it? How crucial is it to be holy? We need it. We need to be holy. I want to illustrate this by answering 3 simple questions, which I'm sure you know. Here's the first question. What are we saved from? You tell me. As a believer, what are we saved from? Sin. Anything else? Death. Anything else? Hell, right? Okay, second question. What are we saved by? Grace. I heard Jesus. I love it. In a kid's voice. It was beautiful. Jesus. Yes. Yep. Saved by grace. Saved by Jesus. Saved by God. Saved by the gospel. Perfectly right. What are we saved for? Good works. His glory. Amen. Saved for service. Saved for God. All these are perfectly right. So then the bonus question. What is one word that you can put in all 3 blanks that would satisfy these 3 questions? One word that you could put in all 3 blanks that would satisfy these questions. What are we saved from? What are we saved by? What are we saved for? One word. God. God. You say, now wait a second, I understand number 2 and 3. What are we saved by? God. What are we saved for? God. What are we saved from? God. Because God will judge sin. This is the need for holiness, right? We must be holy. Why? Because all sin will be judged. Who will judge it? God will judge it. And so this is part of what we have to embrace. Holiness is not just a standard that God says you need to do because I'm going to make your life hard, right? Holiness is something that is crucial for us. It is something accomplished in Christ, and it's something to which we can ascribe to and strive for and see God do a work in our life as we surrender to Him in His Spirit. It is a growth process for us as well. Because in the midst of holiness, we get to dwell with God. God provides fellowship. This is the paradigm of victory in Numbers chapter 31. And this is the paradigm for us as well. Look at David, Psalm 16. I only put verse 5 through 11, but look at this. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. Man, those wonderful phrases. The Lord Himself is what we pursue. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. What's the inheritance of David there? It is God Himself. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel in the night. Also, my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because He is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Think then of what God is offering. Fellowship with him. That's what he's offering. How do we attain it? How do we walk with him? Such is the purpose and the blessing of wholehearted obedience to him. And this passage is making it clear to the second generation of Israelites, and we would do well to pay attention, that he is saying, here's what it looks like in your life, in your nation, if you will be wholly committed to me. God provides victory, fellowship, and then finally abundance. Abundance in goods. Numbers 31, verse number 32 through 35. It says, now the plunder remaining of the spoil that the army took was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 persons in all, women who had not known man by lying with him. So think about these numbers. These are actually startling numbers. They are quite large. They are so large that scholars argue that such cannot be the case. And so they would look at it and say, they're making it up. They're giving us an idealized that is not accurate. And I would say, let's not forget who we're talking about. This is God. And he is fully capable of delivering these numbers. And they're intended to demonstrate his generosity. Let me drive this point home by simply asking you this question. Has God been generous to you beyond measure? And this is what he's doing for Israel. Is he is demonstrating to them that they can trust him. And the reason we're given such practical numbers is because God is a practical God. We could also recognize that the Hebrews were a practical people. But ultimately, God is saying this is real for the here and now. This isn't just like, hey, this will be good for you one day in heaven. It's like God is saying, I'm going to bless you now. And you say, was God still in the business of doing that? And I would say, dear friend, God has always been in the business of doing that. He has always blessed his people. And all of this plunder demonstrates the blessing of God that he desires to give to them, and he will give them as they enter the land. Can you imagine this victory right at the edge of the promised land? And they're like, man, what are we afraid of? What's holding us back? God has prepared us for this, and he will go with us. God does provide physically for his people as they follow him and live in obedience. Abundance in goods, but also abundance in life. Because what God does exceedingly well. Look at this last section, verse number 48 through 54. Then the officers who were over the thousands of the army, the commanders of thousands, the commanders of hundreds came near to Moses and said to Moses, your servants have counted the men of your war who are under our command, and there is not a man missing from us. Just think about what that means. This is hand-to-hand combat. And they are coming and saying that all of this happened without anybody dying. Now you say, how is that even possible? And I would say that's where some scholars would come in and say, this can't be true. This can't be real. And I would look at that and I would say, I would count this as a miracle. Who are we talking about here? We're talking about the God who opened up the Red Sea, right? Was that a miracle? That was a miracle. We're talking about a God who is doing miracle after miracle. And so are we shook by the fact that he does another miracle here and that they go to war and not one Israelite dies? I would look at this and say, this is a demonstration of God's power to them. It wasn't a promise that nobody would ever die as they entered into the land of Israel, but it was a demonstration that if God desired it that way, that would be the case. And we see that happening in many other examples. Gideon is another example. And so what do? Verse 50, we have brought the Lord's offering, what each man found, articles of gold, armlets, bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and beads, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord. Now think about this. It's such a great parallel. You remember what happened when Moses came down off Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments, and the people desired a God to worship? And so what did they do? They took all of their personal possessions, and they threw it into the fire, and out came the golden calf, right? And they worship the golden calf. This is the opposite. Here, they're taking the plunder that God has given them, because this is over and above anything that the whole nation had. This is what each soldier took on his own, which according to the rules of warfare is completely fine. But this is stuff that they had taken. And they are saying, we want to give it to God. And what happens? Moses and Eleazar the priest received from them the gold, all crafted articles, all the gold of the contribution they presented to the Lord. From the commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds, was 16,750 shekels. The men in the army had each taken plunder for himself. And Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from the commanders of thousands, hundreds, brought it into the tent of meeting as a memorial for the people of Israel before the Lord. These guys were awed. These are soldiers. They were awed by the reality that no one died in battle, and the soldiers gave of their own plunder and offering to God in recognition of his sovereignty, of his gracious care, and they offered it as a ransom, as it were. They recognized people should have lost their lives, but God was gracious. And it's worth noting that this new generation, acting in obedience to the Lord's command, gained a victory that highlighted the folly of the first generation's unbelief in Numbers 13 and 14. Their parents had refused to enter the land because they feared fighting against its inhabitants, and they were sure that if they went forward, their wives and children would become plunder for their enemies. And the exact opposite happened. And now the second generation said, let's put this forward as a memorial. A memorial for them, but also a memorial for God. Remember, it's in the tent of meeting. And so that God would see this. And he would remind himself of his own people and his love for them. Numbers 31 demonstrates when Israel was obedient, then God provided victory, fellowship, and abundance. You say, is God going to do the same today? And I would say, God does not change, not in this way. Will he provide victory? Yes. I'm not talking about going out and fighting armies, physical fighting. But will he provide victory as we go forth in his power? He will. Fellowship is available to us. Abundance, safety, life itself, all of that is what God offers. As we consider these truths, as we embrace this picture that God gave to the second generation of Israelites, we should be reminded that God desires the same for us. He calls us to a task, and he will be the one who will help us accomplish it as well.